People ask me, why did I do this book? I was a journalist covering politics for years and years and years, almost 50 years now, it will be. And I used to think, how decisions actually get made really does not come out. The ordinary citizen, the lay reader, the viewer doesn't get an idea of how do politicians at the top, the prime ministers, they really take decisions which affect all of us, millions of people for generations. And I felt this is a story that needed to be told. The pulls, the pressures, the lobbies, domestic and foreign, caste, community, how does the prime minister synthesize these pressures and competing pressures and come to a view which he or she knows is going to affect people for generations? So that is why I decided to write this book. It was a view from the top. It was how prime ministers decide. And of course, Aleph Publishing asked me to do this in 2018. Of course, years before that, I had been making copious notes. I do my day's story or the day's column that had to be written, and I would see a lot of people. But even things that were said to me informally, I would just jot down and put across, that this is not to be quoted. But somewhere at the back of my mind, I thought I would do a book one day. And so it is these notes which came in very handy in the COVID period when I pulled them out, these scores and scores of interviews with people. Some of them are no longer alive, some of the prime ministers who are not alive. And I was marveled by what I had, what a treasure it was, that information and material. And of course, I added to it secondary sources, newspaper articles, books, more interviews, and this is the final product. I've been a media person, a journalist. I started my journalistic career with the News Weekly in Bombay. And I started in the emergency years when I was asked to join Himmat Weekly, which was the chief editor was Rajmohan Gandhi. And Himmat was one of those news weeklies that took on or resisted the censorship. We had to submit to it. We had to show to the censor things, but it took up issues in, resisting it. And so that's where I cut my teeth in journalism. Subsequently, I moved to the Statesman, where I did 5-6 years of civil rights reporting, which was very exciting, which is like the state of the under trials in India, child labor, and so on, those kind of bonded labor. So, and I also went, took those issues to court. But anyway, then I moved to what was called mainstream journalism with the Indian Express, where I've spent the longest of my career. And I became later the political editor, which I was for 10 years, and also the political editor of the Economic Times for a short stint. And then, of course, for several years after that, I have done freelance work. And so I would say from Indira Gandhi to Narendra Modi, I would have had a ringside view because I've written about them, of how the prime ministers, their prime minister's office, parliament, political parties that I have covered on a day-to-day basis. So basically, I would be what you call, what I'm called, when people describe me, senior journalist, political commentator, and now, of course, the tag author is added to that. So my journalistic career for 50 years, I would say by now, has been essentially writing about national politics and national political players. But I would say here that the first idea of doing a book on prime ministers came to me in 1999. Now that I look back, when is it that I really started to think about it? And it was somebody who was close to the Mrs. Gandhi's family. in her years as prime minister, who was I was meeting this gentleman. He belonged to this Mohan Meakin family who used to um, this old monk rum. They are the manufacturers, and this industrial family was very close to Indira Gandhi in her heyday. And we were meeting. I would often meet, these kind of players. He had got into politics, and he was sitting and chatting over a cup of coffee. And he told me this story of Indira Gandhi, how she had turned very religious after she lost power. She virtually visited every single major temple in the country, partly because she was afraid for Sanjay, her son, who had been what was called an extra constitutional authority during the emergency years, 1975 to 1977. Then she inexplicably went in for elections and lost badly all over North India. And then how did Sanjay help her get back to power in 1980? And this story he was telling me was about her religious inclinations. And he said, when they came back to power, he told her that, ma'am, you must go to Chamunda Devi temple. Now, Chamunda Devi in Himachal Pradesh is a very famous place, and she believed in Chamunda, and she would send money for prasad every month through this gentleman. And so she said, yes, 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 I must go. So you arrange it, but it'll have to wait 4 5 months. So he arranged it, and finally she gave the go ahead, and she was to go on June 22nd, 1980. Everything was arranged, and people were there. The chief minister had come there with his entourage of ministers. And suddenly came word from her that she was not coming and she was going directly back from Jammu to Delhi. So the Pandit at this temple was furious because all arrangements had been made that she would come. And he said, Ma will never forgive her. Ma forgives ordinary mortals when they don't come, but Ma does not forgive rulers who don't come like this. It's like an insult. Anyway, those who were there on her behalf did the puja. And on the 23rd morning, they were heading back to Delhi. And 40, 50 kilometers down the road, they got news that Sanjay Gandhi's plane had crashed in Delhi. It was a new plane that he had, and he was doing very dangerous acrobatics, which he was known for. And so they rushed back, and at 2 o'clock in the morning, when they reached there to her home, she was sitting by the body, and she immediately got up and came to this group of Mohan Meakin people and said, is this because I did not come to Chamunda? So they said, no, 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 you just, they quietened her, and she went back to Chamunda in December of that year. And the same Pandit who had been livid, his hand shook as he performed the rites because she did every single mudra to perfection. And she just wept and wept and wept. And then she went out of the temple and she planted trees, something that, Sanjay Gandhi was part of Sanjay Gandhi's 5-point program, tree planting. And she came back to Delhi that evening, a frail Indira Gandhi, but she had a function. And on the stage, she invited Rajiv Gandhi, her oldest son, and introduced him to the audience. So the political people made a mental note of it. But that obviously that he was going to be her heir. Earlier, Sanjay was going to be her heir. Now, that she was superstitious. She was a believer. That could this have happened without if she had because she had not gone? It showed a very frail, vulnerable side of Indira Gandhi, something we didn't know. And it intrigued me a great deal because when we look at decisions by prime ministers, and she was a very popular, powerful prime minister who knew what she was about. She got the better of her opponents. She helped create Bangladesh. She imposed the emergency, put her opponents in jail. And here was a very vulnerable Indira Gandhi. And I thought to myself, how history captures events, but rarely the processes which go on. And part of that process is, of course, the turbulence and the things behind the scenes, but also the emotional upheavals that the main players may be going through. So I thought to myself, one day I would like to write about prime ministers and how they decide. So that was really first in 99. And then, of course, because it was, if you're a working journalist, day-to-day coverage of things is very, very time-consuming. You can't think of writing a book. It's only much later in 2018 that I decided. And I put in the book 6 prime ministers. There are 14 prime ministers India has. If 15, if you take Gulzarilal Nanda, who was an interim prime minister for 13 days after Nehru's death, and then after Lal Bahadur Shastri's death. But I've taken 6 prime ministers, and I have looked at one major decision by each one of them. And I put that decision under the scanner. The decision I chose as something that would have an impact beyond their lives or change India in some way or the other. And I chose the prime ministers by the thumb rule that since I can't cover all of them, couldn't cover all of them, that they should have completed their term. There were only 2 exceptions I made to that, 3 exceptions I made to that. One, Nehru, even though he was the longest serving prime minister and a colossus who built modern India. But I left him out, not because, I said it's fashionable to rubbish him today, not because of that, but because my own political consciousness started after that. And I included Vishwanath Pratap Singh, whose term lasted only 11 months, but whose decision to empower the OBCs, the other backward classes, giving them a reservation in government jobs, changed India forever. And I felt it needed to be included. I considered doing Narendra Modi. Another prime minister is an incumbent prime minister who looms large in our consciousness and has, in my opinion, brought about a paradigm shift in Indian politics. But I felt, I started working on it and I realized the difficulties I would run into because people close to power who have inside hard information are reluctant to talk as long as the person is an incumbent in power. Most of the people who talked to me about the other prime ministers did so after they had demitted office. So I felt that I didn't also have the benefit of hindsight. It was work in progress. So I felt that I would leave for a future date. So the 6 prime ministers I have written about in the book are Indira Gandhi, Rajiv Gandhi, Vishwanath Pratap Singh, P.V. Narasimha Rao, Atal Bihari Vajpayee, and Dr. Manmohan Singh. And just a quick thing to tell you on the decisions that they made. Indira Gandhi, even today, many of us, many commentators, observers are still tantalized. But why did she announce elections in 1977? She was on top of the situation, emergency was there, our opponents were in jail, and yet, and it's not that of course, many in the Western world were critical of her, but it's not as if Western nations had imposed sanctions against India. So why did she go in for this? Was she more Nehru's daughter, Democrat Nehru's daughter, and less of Sanjay's mother? Sanjay being, as I said earlier, seen for his dictatorial tendencies, seen as an extra constitutional authority. So I've discussed then, and how more important, how did she come back to power in only 2.5 years? Having been routed, wiped out all over North India, lost her own seat. Very few world leaders had done that, come back to power in such a short time. And it was not, of course, the Janata Party which replaced her in government was, divided party. That helped her, but it was, she used every trick in the book. She was a master of real politics, something that generations of politicians after her have followed. But so I looked at that about Indira Gandhi. Much had been written about the emergency, Bangladesh, so I felt I needed to look at another side of her. Then Rajiv Gandhi, very interesting. The youngest prime minister, and uh, looking ahead, taking in, wanting to take India into the 21st century, stars in his eyes. He was a complete break from his mother's, what had by then become very stagnant politics. And she was assassinated, and there were anti-Sikh riots. So, and here was this young man who came on the horizon. I remember he came like a breath of fresh air. And very soon he lost steam. He'd taken very forward-looking decision, top technology missions, anti-defection law to stop this coming and going of politicians from one party to another, lowered the voting age to 18, many progressive. And of course, Punjab Accord, Assam Accord, Mizoram Accord, problems that had been intractable in his mother's time. And he signed these agreements. And yet, caste and community, he just did not understand the hold of caste and community on the Indian psyche. And so there was this, you're too young for it to, recall this, but there was this judgment in April 85, soon after he'd come, what is called the Shah Bano judgment. And here was this old Muslim woman with 5 children, grown-up children, who went to court because her husband wouldn't give her any money or had stopped giving her money and had gone in for triple talaq and taken another wife. And she went to court, and the court ruled in her favor that he give her 179 rupees by way of maintenance. And it created an uproar all over the country. The Muslims felt it was an interference in their personal law. The court had also talked about the desirability of moving towards a uniform civil code, and they were upset with that. And they hit the streets in a way that had not happened before. So Rajiv Gandhi became, concerned, and after many flip-flops, he decided to bring in a law to undo this judgment. And then the Hindus were up in arms because they saw it as an appeasement of the Muslim community. The word appeasement, which we hear about so much these days, entered the Indian political lexicon at that time. And so what did he do? He was advised by his cousin, Arun Nehru, why don't you facilitate the opening of the locks at the Babri Masjid? And these locks had been put there in 1949 after a surreptitious smuggling of the Ram Lalla idol in the sanctum sanctorum of Babri Masjid. That's what made it a disputed territory at that time, disputed. So he facilitated that, and the locks were taken off for darshan, of people could go there and do darshan. Hindus could do that, but that created an uproar in the Muslim community. So Rajiv Gandhi, who thought he would please both communities, found himself pleasing neither. And I remember traveling through UP at that time and how much communal conflict and violence there was. So this led to a series of events after that, led to his majority, 414, unprecedented number of seats in the Lok Sabha, coming down to 197 in the 1989 elections. And he was replaced by Mr. Vishwanath Pratap Singh, who created again an alternative to the Congress. Again, a very interesting story. Again, in 2.5 years. A national alternative to the Congress party, and replaced Rajiv Gandhi as prime minister. So then I look at Vishwanath Pratap Singh, the Mandal decision. He was very beleaguered inside and outside pressures. So a beleaguered prime minister wields this weapon of Mandal, giving 27%. Mandal Commission was set up in Morarji Desai's time. The report was given when Indira Gandhi was Prime Minister. She put it on the back burner. VP Singh pulled it out of a dusty cupboard and gave effect to it. And this led to an uproar in the country. And his government was brought down with the BJP, which was supporting it from outside, withdrawing support. So that also is a fascinating story. Not only the history of the reservation movement, but how all these things were, the drama that surrounded them. And of course, then I went on to Narasimha Rao, his non-decision in not safeguarding the Babri Masjid, which was brought down during his premiership. And he allowed it to be brought down. So I quote people there. And of course, Vajpayee, he went in for the nuclear test for which Narasimha Rao had got the country ready. But he actually pressed the button. And Dr. Manmohan Singh, I look at the Indo-US nuclear deal, which he saw through along with George Bush, the US president, and the weak Prime Minister Manmohan Singh held firm. I mean, he showed a side of himself that nobody thought existed. And despite opposition from Sonia Gandhi, despite opposition from the left parties that propped his government in power, he went ahead with it. And that was instrumental in a new strategic relationship with the United States of America. So anyway, I've looked at these decisions in detail. I've looked at how the prime ministers came to power, the lobbies around them, how the prime minister's offices worked, and so on. It is essentially about the nature of power. And it is essentially about how those at the top wield that power. And it is, as Narasimha Rao himself said, it is, the larger interests at play. And it is also genuine interests in furthering something. So it's a petty agendas that kick in. And one of the things that has come through the book for me as a takeaway is how ad hoc our decision making is in the country. The ad hoc nature of decision making. It is not, if you open up the economy of the country, say, and globalize it, China would have taken, would have had a 50-year perspective. Or other countries, you would have said, should we do it, not do it? What is the way to go? We had to do it in the middle of crisis in 1991. We had a balance of payment crisis. So it had to be virtually done overnight. So the nature of ad hoc decision-making, very ad hoc. And I would say, yes, to wrest power and to retain power is one of the compelling factors for every prime minister. Why the decision is taking. Of course, say the nuclear test. Of course, you have been preparing for it. It's not an overnight thing. Of course, you look at the global scenario. Of course, you wanted to have it done before the CTBT kicked in. But the timing of it, the Vajpayee used very, very astutely. When he came to power in 1998, he was buffeted around by his allies. And within 6 weeks, he was almost brought to tears. I remember Manishankar Iyer asking, who's from the Congress party, asking this question, what has happened to Mr. Vajpayee's smile? And then he goes in for this test to silence all his critics. And there's a national fervor. So every prime minister, and it's also part of skill. You can't fault them. Because if they don't remain in power, there'll be no prime minister story to tell. So, but the ad hoc nature is something that hit me, as I did this thing, that they wrote the book. The other thing that came to my, was a takeaway, a very compelling takeaway for me was how India is a coalition. I don't think there is a country as diverse as India in the world. Every 15, 20 kilometers you travel, it's different. People dress differently, the dialect will be different, the food habits will be different. Of course, the race, caste, community, if you look at the northeast of India, it's a crucible of yellow and brown races. And of course, so many religions, so many languages that we know about. It is a rich tapestry. And I felt at the end of this book that India had to be run like a coalition, whether it's a brute majority in power, whether it's a simple majority in power, or whether it's a non majority, a minority government running the show. And and of course, the other thing that's very striking is the incredible maturing of our democracy with all its fault lines. And the more you grow older, you realize the fault lines, the deficiencies, the shortcomings, and but it is a cacophony of voices, India's democracy. And under every prime minister, for all the good as well as the bad things that they did, and they did both, they represented the wisdom, they represented the underbelly of India. There has been a maturing of that democracy. So that was the other takeaway in terms of theme for me. I told a friend of mine when I started to write the book, I said, I'd really like younger people to read this. It's okay. My generation is familiar with the events that took place, or even much younger would be familiar. I would be adding interesting details to the story, how it happened, and so on. But I really wanted younger people to read it. And, 4 or 5 days ago, I was at an event and somebody came up to me and hugged me and said, I've read your book from cover to cover, and I think it's so marvelous. So when that happens to me at the airport or the railway station, young people who actually read the book and they will come and discuss it with you, but this on this page and this, and I get very excited. Because, and one of the things I really wanted I wanted to write it like that also, not like beautiful prose. Because politics is not beautiful prose. Politics is suspense, it's drama, minute by minute. It's what I call the great Indian Nautanki. And as somebody who's covered politics over the years, there is not a dull day you have. So that part of it, I wanted reflected in the book. And I think for whatever I was writing, does it evoke an image in the mind of my reader? I don't know whether I've succeeded, but that was my effort. So the audience was a much younger audience I wanted to address, those who are interested in politics, and a very large number of younger people who are. I think that the past helps us understand the present. Life doesn't start now. Many times we think, the story starts now. It doesn't. And it is also very interesting that none of the prime ministers inherited a clean slate to write on. They had the baggage of the past they had to contend with whenever they were faced with a decision. So it is a continuum. India is a continuum. Indian democracy is a continuum. And I think why young people need to understand also is because our diversity is ever, ever so precious. And we mustn't lose it or hope to make it uniform. And our democracy, I feel our democracy is not a luxury. It is a necessity for us to stay together as a nation and to move forward with confidence. So that is why I feel what has gone by is so very important to understand, to address the issues of today. And also to be, when you give the human side of a prime minister decision-making process, maybe you become less judgmental. You need to be critical. Of course, you need to be critical, and frontally so. As a media person, I absolutely will say that. Call them to account. But also to understand a little bit more of the what went into it. Like I start the book by my first line is that the top is a very lonely place. And for each of the prime ministers, some of them I asked this question. And it is an awesome feeling that the buck stops with me. Of course, some of them made this loneliness converted it into political capital. Indira Gandhi would not say much, was very private person and would not say much in conversations, would doodle on her pad when people came to see her. She got a measure of them. They didn't get a measure of what she was thinking. That's Narendra Modi. Whenever you see the pictures of him, he will be alone. You see him come down Air India, he's alone. He's standing before Sardar Patel's statue alone. Traveling in a train in South Africa alone. What he's trying to say is, I'm there for you, Mahuna. That is a political message. So they're trying to show the invincibility of the prime minister. All that is very interesting. But I'm saying there is a human side to these prime ministers. And the prime minister in India is a very powerful entity. I think more powerful than possibly many other countries. And the power actually goes way beyond the formal powers that have been assigned by the constitution or the system. And that's why some people call it the prime ministerial dictatorship. So the other thing I felt, that it's need in India to strengthen institutions that act as a check and balance on the power on the political power is also something we need to concentrate on.